Okay.
Three canoes went on a
Certainly could.
trip
But this wouldn't be
to
working.
Canada.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everybody. This is the Town of Wolfeboro Planning Board meeting of January 17th, 2023. Just before we get started, I'm sure many of you were shocked as I was to hear about the devastating fire at Hunter's. I think we are all thinking about the employees, and we're so grateful that no one was injured in this fire. I just want to again thank the police and fire. I think they did a great job. The fire did a wonderful job of containing everything. And then there were a lot of other department people that were also participated. So thank you to all of those folks. Okay, let's see. Roll call. Doug Breskin is down at the left. Nobody's next to Peter. Peter Goodwin. Mike Hodder is the vice chairman. To my right is John Thurston. Next to John is Brad Harriman, who is the representative from the Board of Selectmen, and Julie Jacobs, who is an alternate. Julie, would you be willing to sit because Von Dugan is not here?
Yes, I will.
Okay, great. All right, no public hearings tonight. So we have several items here for discussion. The first one is the capital improvements program. Mike sent you a document that went out with the packet. We then had a email from Linda Murray commenting on it. She's a member of the CIP and Board of Selectmen. And then Mike has responded to that. But Mike, why don't you go ahead and tell us what your thoughts are?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. This is the third time I've made recommendations regarding the CIP to this board. So this is not an unusual circumstance. It's just part of a series of recommendations that for changes to the CIP, all of which have arisen out of examination of the history of the CIP as it was started here in town and as it was conducted. Briefly, the town voted for a CIP under the Planning Board in 1987. Thereafter, the Planning Board did nothing about adopting a CIP or running a CIP for the next 11 years or so. At that point, the Board of Selectmen decided to start running the CIP, calling it the CIP, crafting a set of rules for it, procedures, setting out a horizon for projects to be looked over, and setting out a series of parameters for the sorts of projects that should go before a CIP. That existed for about 3 years until 2000, I believe it was 2000, when the planner at the time, Rob Hausman, noticed that although the CIP was supposed to be under the control of the Planning Board did not have any control over CIP. It was actually being run by the Selectmen. When he brought that up to the Selectmen said, oops, and turned over CIP to the Planning Board, which has run it ever since. However, in the turning over to the Planning Board, everything the Select Board had created to get the CIP up and running, the term of years that it was going to look forward to, the sorts of projects that were going to be included, the membership on the CIP and how those members were to be appointed, and the parameters used to decide whether or not a project was appropriate for CIP were all set by the Select Board, not by the Planning Board. Over time, I have presented the Planning Board, this is now the third time, with changes to the way the CIP runs, which bring it more into line with what the state expects the CIP to be, what the statutes require the CIP to be, and what experience from other towns, New Hampshire Municipal Association, the New Hampshire's Office of Planning, as it used to be called, expects the CIP to be, and what our local planning commissions expect CIP to be. And this is now the third time. These ones that you have in front of you today, recommendations for streamlining and improvement, go to basically how long out the CIP is to look, what kind of projects the CIP should be looking at, and how the process is supposed to be run while CIP is in operation. Currently, projects on the CIP are out 10 years. So we're looking at, in the last iteration of CIP, we're looking at projects coming before the town on the 2023 warrant, as well as the next 9 years. And what that has meant, having such a long horizon, I have found, and I've been on CIP 9 years, what I found is that projects that are considered by members of the CIP committee to be desirable, but that have no funding source, no department attached to them, no project papers, but just a good idea we should look at sometime down the road, are stuck in the out years. So basically, the out years, 10, 9, 8, 7, even 6, turn out to be wish lists. Things that would be nice to do, but we're not ready to do them yet. We don't know how we're going to do them, how we're going to pay for them, or even who's going to do them. Cases in point, the Route 28 project, which, as Linda in her memo noted, was so far out that it got dropped and forgotten about, and the senior/community center, which has been on the master plan for 30 years, and last year was dropped off of the CIP, although the year previous it had been on the CIP, but on such a far out year that it had kind of been forgotten about. My first recommendation is that we shorten the term. The CIP looks out for projects from 10 to 6 years. And the rationale for that is very simple. The statute that authorizes CIP suggests a term of 6 years minimum. So it's thinking about 6 years. In order to have a, what do you call them now? Improvements tax. What do they call improvements tax?
Impact fee.
Sorry, thank you. In order to have an impact fee, you have to set up the ordinances so that if you don't use the money you collected for an impact fee within 6 years' time, you have to make the refund. In order to set up an impact fee statute, you have to have a capital improvements program. So in the state's mind, they're thinking in terms of also 6 years term. I looked around to see what recommendations are made by the state, by the New Hampshire Municipal Association, by the Central New Hampshire Planning Association. They all recommend 6 years. I looked around to see what other towns in the area do. I've surveyed 8 separate towns. I can give you the list if you want, or I just won't take the time, so I don't want to keep you too long here with me droning on. But of the 8 towns I looked at, and that includes Meredith, Laconia, Franklin, New Durham, and so on, of the 8 towns I looked at, 6 of them, 75%, have a 6-year term on their CIP. Only 2 do not. The 2 that do not are Durham, which has a 10-year plan like ours, and New Durham, which has a 10-year plan also. Every other town has a 6-year plan. New Hampshire Municipal Association, in its article, The Best Little Planning Program You Probably Don't Use, suggests a 6-year program. So NHMA recommends 6-year program. If you look in your planning board handbook published by the state of New Hampshire, you'll find a 6-year term. If you look in the article published by New Hampshire Municipal Association describing capital improvements program, you'll also find they recommend a 6-year term. 6 years appears to be the term that is most used and almost always recommended by state, local and municipal authorities. So I'm recommending that we change the term from 10 to 6 years. Second recommendation, qualified projects, and that would also include excluded projects. What exactly is a capital improvement project to begin with? And it's defined in the statute, it's defined by the state, by New Hampshire Municipal, and by just about every town you look at, including the ones that use a 10-year term, as being capital-intensive programs, permanent materials, permanent additions to a town's inventory, with a lifespan of at least 5 years' time, which costs significant amounts of money. They do not include regular maintenance programs for road repair, road work, water department, skimming, or anything of that sort. They only include capital improvement projects with a expected lifespan of a minimum of 5 years. Those towns that make provision for annual road maintenance in their capital improvement program, and there are only a couple of them, Durham is one, Wolfeboro is one, and New Durham is one. They post a regular annual fee for road maintenance. For example, New Durham carries $300,000 every year, year after year, on its CIP for road maintenance. That's what is expected. Anything in addition is a special ask, but it handles road maintenance repair with a regular $300,000 annual outlay. What that means in effect is that their Director of Public Works, and this is the case for Durham and also Wolfeboro, does not have to come to the CIP and argue the case for road maintenance of a particular road, Maplewood or Beach Pond Road or wherever it might happen to be, because he knows he's already got that money coming in as a regular allocation year after year. In other words, what I'd like to do as a second recommendation is to get off of the CIP's horizon regular maintenance and routine maintenance projects, which we have been handling regularly every year, taking up CIP time, taking up departmental directors' time, taking up town managers' time, crafting an ask to the CIP, crafting a proposal form, and so on. That would cover both projects to be included, in other words, capital-intensive projects with a long lifespan, and also cover projects to be excluded, projects that are not that don't look that far out, that do not cover materials or equipment that have a 5-year lifespan. And finally, the deliberative process. This is a little complicated, but I'll try to simplify it. The CIP committee are volunteers, members of the town administrative structure. They are not departmental directors. When a department comes in making a proposal for a project, and let's say it's to reconstruct a road, the individual presenting that project, the director of the department, is the expert in the case. He is presenting to the CIP what he believes to be the best bang for the buck that he's asking for to get a particular road fixed. He has presumably already discussed this with town manager, because the town manager has signed off on the form. So when he comes in, he's got his ducks in a row. What our CIP committee has frequently done has begun to second-guess the departmental director, asking questions like, how deep is the coat you're going to use? What kind of blacktop is it going to be? Where are you going to get it from? What kind of electrical connectors are you going to use on the lampposts on Bridge Falls Path? When you do this particular project, are you going to get it from this vendor or that vendor? What kind of boat is it going to be? Is it a 16 or 24-foot boat? Questions that the departmental director should be they should fall within his purview. They should not be the sorts of questions that the CIP committee is subjecting the departmental director to. He's the expert. He's coming here. Committee members can ask questions, but they should not criticize or contradict his choices unless they have expertise in that field, which would show that the director has made some kind of a mistake. So when it comes to discussions on the CIP committee, some form of ground rules should be drawn up before each committee starts so that members realize that they're not there to second guess the director. They're there to accept the proposal and do their job, which is to rank it, is it really needed, and then to figure out where on the 6-year term it should fall so that its impact is the minimal to the taxpayer in any one particular year. And those are my recommendations in brief. And then I guess the last one would be, it would be nice if we could see the narrative for the CIP published in the town report. Other towns do that so that the town citizens can see what goes on behind the scenes in the budget and the selectmen's process, what sorts of information they get during their process to help make their decisions. And that's it. I won't go into the questions and the comments that Linda raised unless members of this board want me to. I sent to all of you through Kathy my responses to her comments, and I'd like to just leave them stand. I think they're all pretty self-evident unless there's particular questions. Where we stand now with these are recommendations. I have not put them in the form of motions, principally because I think the board should think about it first, and secondly, since some of these are significant changes to the way CIP works, and since I'm only a lame duck member of this board at this point, I don't think it would be right for me to make recommendations with only 2 more meetings to go before I'm gone. I think that should be something that the board should do, but I would urge you to cast your minds back over how we got to where we are now, and that this is just one more step in the process of reforming the CIP as we inherited it from the select board.
Okay.
Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, okay. Okay, and questions for Mike?
Yeah, one question, Mike. With regard to the change in the planning horizon that you suggest from 10 years to 6 years,
Yeah.
At the end of the paragraph here, you say that planning convenience for those wish list items as you've described them is better supplied through other more appropriate instruments, and I wonder if you could give me an example.
Where are you
This is your number 1 recommendation.
Okay, sorry.
That's all right. The last sentence says planning convenience is better supplied through other more appropriate instruments, and I wonder if you could give me an example of that.
Try to remember what I was writing there for a second. I haven't read this for a while. I wrote this back in October.
What other tools we might use to keep track of wish list items for the CIP?
Well, remember, I'll give you the medium-long answer. The CIP that we have now, used by the Board of Selectmen, was principally used as a budgetary tool so that they could keep a track on where they were in the budget. And you saw that in Linda's response. The first time Linda starts thinking, or the Board of Selectmen start thinking about the budget, is when they get the CIP program, and that all of a sudden they now know what items are coming on their table for budgetary discussion. The Board of Selectmen crafted their CIP for a 10-year program so that the first couple of years, maybe the first 5 or so, would be projects on the immediate horizon that they had to start scrambling about. And then further out, they would put other projects and other projects later on. That use of CIP was improper because that's not what it was designed for. But there's nothing that says that those last 4 years of the CIP program as it exists now couldn't be torn off and turned into a budgetary plan for the selectmen could run, or I guess the budget committee if they were interested, but they usually respond to a year by year. The selectmen in particular, if the selectmen are aware of a project, for example, sake of argument, the senior center. senior community center, that the town wants, the town needs, and the town has been asking for a long time, and that is going to come up at some point in the future, but that can't happen right now because there are other more pressing needs in its way. There's nothing to stop the selectmen from putting a little tickler in their diaries, 7 years out, start thinking about senior center, or come up with their own form of spreadsheet, budgetary spreadsheet. What are we looking at over time? Rather than using the CIP program as their budgetary aid memoir, which is what they have been doing it with it for the last, well, ever since they took it over in '98, come up with their own aid memoir.
Because
More appropriate.
functionally speaking, the CIP is how one funds one's master plan. I mean, that's the ultimate tool. The CIP is the funding structure behind the master plan. So if the master plan has goals in it, those goals are ultimately, I mean, it's a master plan is typically capital projects. A capital improvement program is to help fund those atypical budget items. So it makes perfect sense. Road maintenance is atypical.
Yeah. And notice that in a master plan, the state recommends that it be updated every 5 years, not every 10. So the state is also looking at a shorter term than a 10-year program that we currently have using for the CIP. Again, you have to remember also that according to statute, there can be no CIP run by the planning board unless the master plan has already first been adopted by the town. So there is a direct connection between master plan and CIP. You simply have to have one. The state says that, NHMA says that, everybody you talk to says that, every single town that publishes their CIP narrative says, in accordance to the master plan, we have come up with blah, 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 blah. There's no doubt there whatsoever. The master plan is like the town's wish list. The CIP is a way of implementing that. But again, some of the projects on the master plan look out pretty far. Yet, if you're going to, I mean, I don't know how you run your budgets at home, but I don't run mine on a 10-year program. I run mine on a 1 or 2 year program, maybe because that's all I can really effectively control or manage. I have outlooks, things we'd like to do later on, but they don't come to my attention the way the managing my payments for oil heat, for example, do. Those are immediate. And in the case of a CIP, dealing with public safety building, which is an urgent need, fairly expensive, comes to mind in the within a 1 or 2 year time frame as of today, whereas something like the senior center, which is a desirable project and may be argued to be important and necessary also, but currently can't be looked at any further out than maybe 6 to 10 years.
Okay, go ahead, Peter. We need your mic.
I look at the CIP and see that the things in 7, 8, 9, and 10 years, 9 and 10 years are very general. And you're saying that they should not be included at all in the CIP. My suggestion would be there would be an addendum in the back which would end up saying these are issues which we need to deal with in the future, such as the senior center. You're not putting dollar amounts on them because if you're going to build something in 10 years from now, it is not going to, the dollar amounts are not known. And there's so many things that are uncertain. But if those things are at least mentioned, then there's an awareness down the road to have that at least considered.
Yeah, and you're right. If the CIP were a budgetary document run by the select board, that's exactly the way the CIP should be run. It should include projects in the very far out years that the selectmen recognize are important for the town, have to be dealt with, but they can't be handled right now. But the CIP is not a budgetary document. It's designed to be an advisory document to the Budget Committee and the Select Board to help them make decisions, because pretty in-depth hearings are held by CIP on important budgetary items with a short-term horizon, not a long-term horizon, and they only deal with projects that either have a funding source already, have a projected funding source, which is pretty kind of cool or pretty kind of set up, maybe application for a grant coming due in a couple of years' time, have a procedure in place. We know we know the vendors, we know the approximate costs, budgetary, have a business plan, in other words, have documentation. What the CIP has been used for up until now on those out-year projects are things that we'd kind of like to have if we could, maybe kind of, but we don't have any idea what it's going to cost us, how to get it. We don't even know who's going to run it. Case in point, the senior center was proposed year before last by the town manager. The town manager doesn't have a budget for building a building, for running a senior center, but because it was a project that was considered to be worthwhile, something we shouldn't forget about, it was decided, I guess on the select board's level, to look around, who can we pin this project on, and it was pinned on the town manager. And that's not the way you run a capital improvements program. Capital improvements program, I look at as being sort of like a budget program that you run in your own house. It's things that are immediate and that are coming up that you know how you're going to pay for, and you know how you're going to get into your house. Big expensive things like a new boiler or a new water heater, something like that. You know who has it, you know how much it's going to cost, how it's going to get delivered, and you begin to save for it. You know what year you're going to put it in. Painting the house every 10 years, so you have that on a 10-year horizon, but you're not necessarily saving for it right now. That's the CIP. That is what a CIP is supposed to be for, and actually that is what every agency in the state considers a CIP to be for, and 3/4 of all the towns that I surveyed also think the CIP is for.
What is the harm of mentioning those projects which are out there in the future, as in, I own a piece of land and I would like to end up clearing this to make a field where I could grow hay?
Absolutely nothing. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with mentioning a project like that.
So therefore, if it is an addendum at the back with no numbers put on, just as a list of things which we need to worry about in the future, isn't that a good thing for the CIP to do?
No, because it doesn't.
Why?
Because it doesn't belong in the CIP. The CIP is not a budgetary outlook planning tool. It is a capital improvements program tool for the short term. That's how it was designed. That's how it's supposed to work. The only reason it doesn't work that way here is because of the history of the way the CIP was run in the town before it was taken over by the planning board. The budgetary planning for the town is done by the select board and the budget committee. This capital improvements program is designed to look only at expensive items that the town's going to have to buy at some point, whether it likes it or not, and how to figure out how to pay for them without hitting the taxpayer really hard in any one year. That's what CIP is for, not for controlling wishful thinking projects down the line. That's up to the selectmen. And actually it's probably up to the town manager more than it is to the selectmen. That's what his job's supposed to do.
Okay, you all set, Peter?
What I said was not accepted, so therefore I will let it drop. The idea that you would just put some of these ideas which are down the road as an addendum at the back of this with no money attached, to me makes sense, just for another group to be saying what the town ultimately is going to need.
Okay, go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, a couple questions and comments, I guess. Mike, you keep saying, you don't think this, you're not using this as a budgetary tool mainly for, the projects to line them up and stuff. But yet to do that, we're taking into account the cost of these items, which really, in my mind, is a budgetary, thought process going into this, into the CIP here, especially for the short term, not short term, but the projects on the immediate horizon, I guess, anyway. So I kind of, I think I kind of disagree that it's not used as a budgeting tool, because I think budgeting does play a large part in this this whole process here. And I kind of agree with Peter. I think that limiting it to the 6 years and not including anything out beyond that, in my opinion, would be a mistake to do, because when you look at a lot of these capital purchases that we do, say for the fire department, the highway department, or their equipment and stuff like that, those are all purchases that are going to last 10, 15 years anyway, maybe even 20 years on like the new ladder truck we just got. Hopefully that's 20, 25 years out there. So I think we really do need to look ahead beyond the 6 years. I think the 10-year thing is very reasonable. And it said here in the horizon, it's recommended, to be, minimum. I think you made a comment, it's minimum of 6 years. Nothing in there says that it can't be longer. So there's no reason that we couldn't have a 10-year outlook on this thing. And as Peter said, you're not going to put costs associated with a project like the community center that's going to be out there 8, 9, 10 years from now, because who knows what those costs are going to be at that time. When it gets closer, moves up into that 5 to 6 year slot, then we start putting budget numbers on it from the engineers and design, the architects that have been working on it to get the conceptual plans done. So those are kind of my thoughts on that part. Regarding the road reconstruction, water, sewer line, stuff like that, I think I kind of agree with Linda's comments on that, that the, they are, I guess what a note I made here on the roads, when we put our warrant articles together for the roads there, those aren't routine maintenance type projects. Those are specific reconstruction, an investment into the road, not just a maintenance thing. It's, either boxing out all new drainage, it's a rebuild of the road so it's going to last hopefully another 20 years or so on its life cycle before it needs to be addressed again. Any of these roads that need just a, grading and ditching and stuff like that is actually included in the operating budget anyway as the maintenance type items. So that's already, maintenance items are already, budgeted in that direction. So I think the road reconstruction that we do each year, which is, close to, $1 million, $1.3 million, I think is what we've had the last year. And I think they add up to that this year. Is important to have on the horizon here too for that. So, and as she said too, any of the sewer projects are done with taxpayer money. They're not done out of enterprise funds because the sewer department just isn't large enough to handle the cost to rebuild and improve the collection system. So that's why it's always the history. It's always been put onto the taxpayer for any of those projects, which I think would fall under a CIP type program. So just want to kind of put those comments out there and for what it's worth, I guess. Yep.
John?
So I'm not a professional on the CIP. I've been learning about it as time goes on. And as I listen to Mike and I listen to Brad, and I listened to Tavis say that the master plan is the sub-base for the CIP, and the way I am totally looking at it is the CIP is dead unless the selectmen support it and find the funding needs to make it work. And so in the big picture, the CIP would just be a document floating around with no support behind it if we didn't have the selectmen to come together with the planning board to make that happen. So
And the budget committee.
and the budget committee. So I think the conflict of is all the boards need to work together on that. So the underlying part goes back to the department heads. I think if you have the CIP, it gives the department heads cover to solidify the future projects without having to worry about where the funding is going to come from, and then they can focus on the other projects moving forward. I mean, how departments fit in if they have to answer for funding all the time. I mean, they have to go to the town manager, and then they have to go to the budget committee, and we know they're a firm group. So you know, if the department heads know that something's in the CIP for long term, I think that they would worry less about it. And then when I think about the capital improvements list, I think about, okay, is there actually a list of items, improvements that they should key on, say these are the improvements, okay, that's one of them, and so it falls under the category. So if the improvements list isn't provided, then how do they know if their project is an improvement or falls under an improvement? So that was a thought there. And then I wonder about the 100,000. I mean, in today's angle, I mean, 100,000 isn't really a lot of money. I get there's utility trucks and so forth and so on, but I wonder why the number hangs at 100,000 and doesn't move up or down. And that's all I have.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I tend to agree that I think the 10-year plan really has worked well for the town. And, you know, I've been on the CIP for a while also. And, you know, we do put things at the end, but we put them there so that we don't forget about them. This year we did forget about a couple things. One of the projects that I think is really important to the town is rehabbing the municipal electric building. And that got put on back several years ago so that we wouldn't forget about it. And everybody would be aware that that project needed to be done. And so, you know, I think that's kind of an important issue. And also to the roads and some of the projects that CIP looks at, I don't think that there's a negative there. I mean, it's kind of a positive. We get to, CIP gets to look at it, talk about it, and, you know, ask some questions that then go on to the next, to the selectmen and then on to the budget committee. And to me, it's just more of a thoughtful process. And so I'm more of a fan, I guess, of CIP than existing the way it is than Mike might be, but those are my thoughts.
Can I have a chance to respond?
Sure, yes.
Remember, CIP program was never established to be a budgetary tool. It was never established by the state to be an aid memoir for programs that we kind of like to do sometime later on, maybe. Never meant to be a wish list bucket. If something doesn't get onto the CIP, it does not mean it doesn't get onto the warrant. If, for example, this would be a recommendation of nuts and bolts, the town, with the planning board were to recommend to CIP that the CIP include an annual standing outlay of $1.3 million for road maintenance, year after year, that number to be adjusted up or down depending upon changing circumstances. That would require a warrant article, but it would also remove the necessity for the Department of Public Works director to come in and make his case and take a large chunk of one of the 8 meetings that CIP is allocated to get the entire process done, which could then be allocated to another project which requires additional time. as far as the term is concerned, Brad, 10-year term is anomalous in the state. It's not recommended by the state. It's not recommended by the municipal association. It's not recommended by the Central New Hampshire Planning Association. The reason why we have a 10-year term is somebody decided to look out 10 years. It's not as if it were written in stone. Everybody that I've looked at, the state authorities recommend a 6-year program because that makes the program real and concrete. You're dealing with items that are coming up right now. When the CIP looks at a project, let's say for sake of argument, one of Dave Ford's presentations, 1.3 for road maintenance, annual road maintenance. The CIP's job is not to look at that 1.3 million and say, where'd you get that number? And look at the individual items in there and second guess each item. Because the CIP members don't have that expertise. CIP takes the 1.3 million, assumes the departmental director is correct in his assessment, and then is supposed to figure out how to put that up on the schedule so that it hits the taxpayer with the least amount of impact. So in other words, the CIP doesn't look at the cost of items. It doesn't parse those items out. It accepts the figure presented by the departmental director, because who else has got the expertise but him? Budget committee does the fine-tuning. The select board does the fine-tuning. Capital improvements program has to take what the departmental director gives it because we haven't got the expertise to contradict him. We're just a bunch of volunteers and town officials. So we take the number that he gives us, and our job, the CIP's job rather, was to figure out when to post it, did it meet the criteria, does it really be called for in the master plan? I'm not going to beat a dead horse. There's clearly no appetite on the board for any further changes, but I'll say just simply this, that if Wolfeboro wants to do things the way the state recommends them and the way most of the towns in the state do them, sticking to the current plan is not going to do that. Changing, according to the recommendations I made here, and these are not off the top of my head, these are based on what I see in the state. Changing them brings Wolfeboro into accord with the way everybody else in the state works when they deal with their CIP program. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
One of the issues that you did bring up was, more specific rules for CIP, and that certainly is something we can think about. I would think, if they're so that they're not wandering off course, like sometimes they do. But again, the planning board appoints the committee. We expanded it to get more citizens involved. And, in my mind, it's worked quite well. And so, does it need to be looked at it and change some things? Probably it does. But, when you ask people to be on a committee, you want to hear what their thoughts are and what their reactions are to things that are being proposed. And so that's what we've done. And, this is sort of the CIP, when we present it, is a result of that program.
Well, to speak to credibility here of the recommendations I've made, it was as a result of the research I did that we discovered that the way members were appointed to the CIP was not appropriate. And it was based on the research I did that we expanded the number of public citizens from 2 to 4.
Right,
and it was
I
based
think it's
on
worked well.
And it was based on the research I did that we redefined the criteria that we use to decide what projects get on the CIP horizon or not. So I'm submitting now a further set of proposals which perhaps might have some credibility simply because of the 4 I've submitted so far. 3, by your own words, have worked out pretty well.
Okay.
Kathy, I have some
yeah.
comments in that I am very much in agreement with the fact that the capital programs or capital projects need to be of that size and of that duration. That to me is very evident. And I also believe that the deliberative process which goes on, Mike talks about the idea that the CIP shouldn't be talking about what kind of lights are being put up. That is not the level which they should be going into. They should be asking whether the lighting is needed. And if the lighting is needed, is this a reasonable price?
Right.
So I think that is very much along the right line. And I also think that in number 5, he talks about a program narrative, which really needs to get what is done and what is produced out to the public. Because if this group does a whole lot of work and does research, their work should be commended and shown to the public.
Right.
I do disagree with the idea that the CIP is not a budgetary instrument. And if it wasn't a budgetary, and if it's not a budgetary instrument, there shouldn't be any dollars put next to it. But there are dollars put next to particular projects, which are then go to the budget committee. And so it is a document used in that. It may not be expressly in legal terms written that way, but there are dollar amounts given to various groups. And so therefore, that information is used, in fact, to make budgets.
Tavis, the town manager, have you had any discussions with him about this issue, about changes to CIP?
I haven't had any discussions yet. I figured tonight would be the kickoff for that to see if there were any further dialogue.
Yeah, okay, because I did have an email from the town manager saying, why didn't this go to the CIP committee first for their thoughts?
Well, that's fairly simple. There is no CIP after they finish their 22 document.
It seems to me that it would last until the election, and then we appoint new members to a lot of different.
CIP dissolves when CIP is done. There is no CIP now.
Okay, well.
Not a standing committee of the zoning board.
Okay.
It gets reappointed every year.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, that it does get reappointed each year.
So there is no
And
CIP committee right now.
it seems like it should last through the year, just like all of us are elected or appointed, and so. Anyway, that was what his concern was.
But isn't the task of the CIP to produce a document, and after that task is finished, the committee has no use and therefore would dissolve?
Yeah.
Yes, that's the way it is. In the
That may
statute.
be true, but at the last CIP committee meeting we had, someone said, "Can we get together, before the next cycle starts?" And I said yes.
But
And
no authority for that.
okay, all right, but that's well.
It was a nice idea, and we could all I think we even discussed it, we could get together informally.
Microphone.
No, this would be a regular meeting.
But there is no CIP committee once we submit our narrative, once the committee submits its narrative to the planning board, its job is done, it furls its tents, and it goes home. That's just
Okay.
how it works.
All right, but
So
well,
there is- so
maybe
when-
I'm.
When Jim and Linda request that this go to the CIP committee first, for discussion.
No, he wanted input.
Input from the CIP committee. Remember as well that the CIP committee is a subcommittee of this board.
It's a committee of the board.
This board is its parent.
Yeah.
It is its child.
Okay.
This board makes the rules for the CIP, not the other way around.
Okay. And so if the planning board decides that this should go to the CIP, then that would be okay. Is that what you're saying?
Once the CIP committee is reconstituted in whenever, July or August, and you have new membership on it, then you could present this to the CIP committee. And this is what I would see. CIP committee can wrangle all at once and make recommendations to the planning board about how it should be constituted and what it should do, but it will be the planning board's decision.
Yeah. Well, but yes, that's true. It would, just like any other committee that the planning board has. We tell the committee that they have to come back to the planning board.
Right.
And that's the way that...
That's the proper way to do it.
Yeah, okay. Well, and that's what we're talking about, is having the CIP take a look at it and comment.
Realize that you only have 8 CIP meetings, which if you continue using the same parameters for things to discuss will be chock-a-block full and you'll be running out of time at the end. If you're going to give the CIP a commission to look at itself and figure out what it should and shouldn't do, take the time to discuss it during a meeting and then get back to planning board, only to have the planning board come back to CIP and say, yep, you're right, or nope, you're wrong, you're not, you're wasting time.
Oh, okay, I still think we need more input. It should go to the CIP committee. We should have a discussion with the selectmen and finance director, and we've got a budget committee member on our committee too, on CIP. I mean, we need more information from people as to what they see the value of the CIP is, and, you know, where they would like to see it going. I don't see anything outlandish about that.
No, I never use the word outlandish, and besides, it's all moot anyway, because
yeah.
I will not be a member of that CIP committee. This is for that, this stuff is for this board to figure out how to do.
Okay. All right, well then, I guess that means it needs to go on another agenda so that it can be advertised for more than a discussion. Tavis? Is that what?
You want to have it on
Mike
another?
says that he wants people to vote on this. Isn't that what you just said, the
No.
planning board?
No?
Don't you want to have a discussion and then a vote?
At this point, this is how I see it. At this
Okay.
point, the documentation I've generated, I've turned over to this planning board. Mm-hmm. I should, at this stage, step out since I'm not going to be a member of the planning board again.
Mike, could you move up to your mic?
Sorry. I leave it in the planning board's hands. You decide what you want to do with it.
Okay, we as a group.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
because I don't think it would be fair for me to interject myself any further than I have.
Okay, well, I really feel as if we need a little more input from the folks that I just mentioned. But how do other people feel?
Can I
so
just
that
say
we
one
can-
thing?
Yeah.
That Mike has obviously done a lot of research on this, and
Yeah.
his ideas are things which we really do need to consider. Whether we accept them all or none, I doubt we'll accept none, but we need to consider them, and I think that it is very good that he has made this presentation for further deliberation.
Okay. Anyone else? So do you want this back on another agenda, or how do you want to proceed?
Now, I would suggest that it could be added to a later agenda so that if we decide to make changes to the procedure, we can then make the motions and vote on it as needed.
Okay. All right, so a later agenda? Okay.
February 21st?
Excuse me?
February 21st?
In March, I should not be here. Or I could just recuse myself.
March 21st?
It doesn't have to be done immediately because the committee doesn't form until when? July, so therefore I think that we have time to think about this, and it
Right.
may be that there's more input.
We'll put it on the year 10 for revisit.
Okay, well, we usually do form the committee right after the town votes and everything, so is that okay with everybody? Okay, all right. Okay, the next discussion item, you've got something on the submitted zoning petitions. You want to just speak to that?
Just providing these as information only. These were petition zoning articles that were not accepted for, I'll just say, a variety of reasons. So you have the entire petition as it was submitted in front of you. The cover letters from the town clerk explaining why they weren't accepted. So the first one is recommended changing. This is specific to setbacks. This is a proposed change that setbacks be measured from the foundation wall or primary framing member as opposed to eave line or furthest extent of deck or stair or otherwise. Kathy asked that I address them briefly. This has been generally cumbersome. But again, I will say it's a fairly even split between the communities that measure either to the foundation wall or to the outermost extreme of a building. Typically, when such a thing becomes an equation or a question is when somebody wants to put on an addition. The addition might meet setbacks, but the eaves, if you will, to the addition don't. So that cramps some people's style. I would not say that this is generally a large item going back through the history of ZBA submissions for variance requests on this. This is not one of the bigger ones. It's usually much more of a structure, but that's just for information. On page 3 of what's in front of you, this is looking specifically at side yard setbacks in the shorefront residential district. Consideration of looking at the average width of lot rather than looking at the reference line, which is the straight line shore frontage width for determining the setbacks. More often than not, a shorefront lot is wider at its shorefront than it is where it meets the road. So if you have 100 feet of road, if you might have 25 feet of road frontage, but you have 150 feet of shoreline frontage. But with 150 feet of shoreline frontage, you have a 25-foot setback throughout the whole lot. So this is looking at normalizing, if you will, lot width setback considerations. Again, not a frequent flyer. Typically where this is an issue, the earlier one I mentioned is also an issue. The next one, and you can tell by the length, so this is starting on page 4. This is looking at a revisit of what is currently repair replacement of legal pre-existing use or structure, expansion of 25%, what's used for looking at it, what needs a special exception, what needs a variance, what's allowed by right. And when you dig back through, as I have, as early as the 80s, this was a much simpler section, and over time it has been modified. As most things in Wolfeboro, it's been modified largely by, a couple of years of finding of this or a couple of years of finding that, and little tweaks were made. I would suggest that this one probably is worth not necessarily this revisit, but I think this is something the board might want to add to its work plan in 23. Same thing on the next one, starting on page 5, 6, where are we? 3, 4, 5, 6, yes. This is the expansion of non-conforming structures. I've only been here 2 years and a couple of months at this point, but I will tell you that I've had 15 different attorneys read this section 15 different ways. To their credit, it was all for the benefit of their client, but what it suggests to me is the language isn't entirely clear. So this is another area where the board might want to look at some modifications. I don't know what they are at this point, I don't have any recommendations at this point. I don't necessarily agree with the proposed changes here. But this is an area that gets, I'll say, cumbersome from the application standpoint or from the implementation standpoint. So the first two, really not a big concern. The second two, I would suggest the board might want to look at them. But after you read through them, I'm happy to answer any questions and bring this back at a later work session if the board's interested.
Okay. All right. Anyone have any comments or questions?
I guess my thought would be that because you had at least some people writing a petition and some people not enough signing it, they are issues that we should look into. So
They can be. Keep in mind, sometimes the origin of a petition is because someone didn't want to go through another process.
correct. All I'm saying is that they have
Yes.
been brought to our attention. We need to look at them, and if we don't look at these issues,
Yes.
you know, the petition will come back with more signatures, and then we may be stuck with something we don't like.
Correct.
Okay, then maybe for the next meeting, you could tell us which one. I mean, I agree. I think the non-conforming section, that probably really should be looked at. So, you know,
Okay.
whether the
I will
other
look at
two
something
are
for
worth it or
the
not.
February work session. I'll give you some more meat behind each of these,
Yeah.
but in the meantime, if you could look at them, that would be
Okay,
helpful to understand the pictures in the next go-around.
okay,
I have a
good.
question.
Yep.
So do you have any applications in front of you that are being decided on the existing structures which were legally existed prior to the adoption of the zoning ordinance, and they want to do work? Are there applications out there right now that are being discussed?
I know the three different applications that led to each of these petition articles. None of them have a current permit application submitted. Does that answer it?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how you're dealing with it right now.
He's enforcing the regulations, I hope.
It's
I mean, if the interpretation is an interpretation, how are you interpreting it?
No. That's not the question. So for the first one with setbacks, there are situations in town where a potential applicant would benefit from this definition of setback versus the current one. What they've been told is you need a variance.
Okay.
There was a discussion of an application for somebody in the shoreland that said, well, geez, it doesn't really seem fair that I have a 25-foot setback when only the first 50 feet that I can't build in anyway have 100 feet in width. Everything else is narrower. And I said, but this is the way the regulation is written.
Okay.
They said, but if we comply with that, nothing complies. The lot is so narrow, the existing house is in both side yard setbacks. So you're functionally saying I can't put on an addition. I'm saying, no, I'm functionally telling you you can't have an addition without a variance. So the second one on the average width, someone did, I don't know if it was Tony Fallon or not, somebody did a lot of research into the shoreland lots, looking at the number of them that taper towards the road or taper away from the shoreline, and suggested that this might be a remedy. The interesting thing to point out here is he kept all the setbacks the same. He's only suggesting we look at the average width of the lot, which is a fairly gentle approach to what a potential application was looking to address for relief. The other ones are both things that come up frequently and are just very cumbersome. Particularly the repair and replacement or vertically expanded, but it has to be within the same three-dimensional envelope and not more than 25%, which actually conflicts with the Wetlands Conservation Overlay District. And I've had more than one engineer and more than one architect come in and say, well, which one applies? And I have to say the most restrictive of all of them. Some of those have actually led to variances. Some of them have led to special use permits. I have to go by what it says. And at times the question is, well, which one is the most restrictive?
So there usually is an end to the means, but somebody just has to take an extra step to get there.
Correct. Or the question to the planning board is my telling them that? Is that what the planning board intends the section of the zoning ordinance to be doing? Is this actually furthering what the board believes to be furthering the master plan? So,
Well, and if there are cases like that, you should bring it to us and we could then clarify it.
correct.
Yeah, at the next town meeting. Okay, next item is the model solar regulations. I had told Nancy about it because she's head of the Energy Committee, so she's here, but why don't you go ahead, Tavis?
So what I put in the packet is what New Hampshire is calling the model solar zoning ordinance. If you look at it, it clearly does not read like a solar ordinance, but it points out all of the key pieces that you'd want to consider. I've been going through town after town looking at solar regulations, particularly those. I mean, Middleton has a huge solar array. They have no solar regulations, which is not uncommon. Rochester has been in court several times. They have large solar arrays under utility generation, and they're currently in court because the term utility does not apply to solar, because you're not taking a raw material and converting it to an energy source, and there's no mechanical means, so it's not production. Lovely. That's a fun one, yes. Well, when you get attorneys involved, it gets creative. It was said as recently as two zoning board meetings ago that solar farms are effectively agriculture. You put them out in the field and you grow power, just as you grow corn. That's a bit of a stretch, depending on how you look at it. Clearly, solar panels are not corn stalks, but the concept is similar. But there are parts of the country that are looking at solar farms as agriculture. I don't think the planning board, much less the town, is going to start looking at solar farms, of 30, 40 acres of solar panels as agricultural. But I do think the most recent application that went to the ZBA that I anticipate being forthcoming to the planning board in February is indicative that the town should look at having some solar regulations, whatever they may be. So I wanted to give the board, a fun 24-page document to flip through. I can give you one if you want. Are they conditional use permits? Are they permitted uses? Many towns say if it's accessory to a residential use or it's on the building, it doesn't need to go to the planning board. But if it's a large array, whether you look at kilowatts or acreage or some combination of the two, that site plan is required. Maybe it's a conditional use permit. On page 11, there's a draft table that shows accessory solar, permitted community solar, permitted commercial solar as conditional use permit. Well, that also then means you need a definition of what commercial solar is. So it's very similar to the wind turbines and things like that the town has adopted over time. I'm looking for guidance. If the board says it wants to look in a particular direction, I can look for regulations that go that way, and we can start having some.
Okay, what about the residential solar? That's working okay within our current zoning regs, isn't it?
Correct. In fact,
okay.
Until recently, no one has come to my desk saying, I want 30 acres or 20 acres of solar array. I mean, people have come in with solar trackers that are on the same lot as their property, or they want to put solar panels on their roof, and it's literally just an electrical permit.
Yep.
And have a nice day.
Okay, so we do have regulations that deal with that.
The electric code covers it. We don't have any zoning regulations on it. Right now, if somebody comes in and says, the only thing I want to do on this 30-acre field is a solar farm, I have to say you need a variance because it's not a use right now.
If a resident wants to put a solar panel on their roof.
We'll give them a permit.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. That's,
Yes, this is next level solar, if you will.
yeah, right. No, I get that, but I was just trying to clarify it for people that this is not the residential.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, all right.
So what do you clarify a solar board as? Is it a structure?
Well, I guess and I have the same question, Mike, is that if a resident wanted ground-mounted solar, would that be considered an accessory structure?
Yes. Now, the fun twist, you're allowed 2 accessory structures for any residential home, plus 1 additional for every 80,000 square feet of lot. If you have a detached garage, can you have 2 ground-mounted solar? Or are you subject to the 80? These are the hairs that need to be split or parsed out here.
There are also going to be some technical hairs as well. Just occurred to me, maintenance of a solar farm. There should be some kind of understanding of how a solar farm is maintained, particularly when it comes to end of its life, and then disposal of the solar panels when they are no longer useful. They can be toxic and they have to be dealt with as well. It occurs to me that maybe the board would want to reach out to get in an expert, as we did when it came to telecommunications, to help write some kind of an ordinance for us, for the board.
This model in front of you actually includes, I mean, it's right on page 20, the abandonment and decommissioning. It's almost parallels telecommunications. There are ordinances out there that are addressing everything that's been talked about. I'm just wondering if the board has an appetite for it. If generally yes, I'll start looking at some examples and we can work through what that would look like as far as interweaving.
Oh, okay, have you talked to Barry Muccio at all about this?
I have talked to him on project-specific levels. I haven't talked to him about adopting solar regulations.
Yeah.
With him, it's usually how long does somebody need to have energy before he'll do the buyback? How much buyback is allowed? Do his lines have capacity for it, et cetera? When we get to the level that this ordinance is looking at, that's a whole new animal that would warrant more discussion with MED.
Yeah, right. But we probably do need to hear from him also.
Yeah. The one that is likely to be pending before the planning board shortly will not be going into MED's system at all.
Right. Yes. Yeah, I got that.
So wasn't Jordy's project over there behind the lumberyard, that was a solar project? That was a solar field project?
It's accessory to the multifamily.
Yeah.
Not an independent solar. But yes, that raises the same questions. Or could, depending on where the ordinance goes.
Okay, Nancy, did you want to say anything about this? She's the head of the Energy Committee. So you may have to turn that one on.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you very much for telling me about this. I just got it today, so I really haven't read it. It is from the New Hampshire, it used to be the New Hampshire Sustainable Energy Association, which is now Clean Energy New Hampshire. And the town is a member of Clean Energy New Hampshire, so they can provide some advisory services to us for free. So that's a great resource. Sorry, I just wanted to get my notes out here. So first, thank you. I think it's great to be proactive thinking about this. I think it's a great idea. I will say that just so you can rest assured, there are already some limitations, quite a few, on solar installations here from the MED's net metering policy. It limits already the scale. It's quite small. It's 100 kW. The reason that the project that he's talking about, as Tavis was just saying, is being considered and going through the process, is that they're in a rare position where they're in our town, but they aren't part of the MED's
Grid.
Yeah, they sell it to the New Hampshire Co-op or PSNH or Eversource. So that's why it's being considered. But most residential and commercial in town are part of MED, so they are restricted to the rules in the net metering policy. So you can't come into town and just build a huge array. So we're safe as far as that. But a lot of these little nidgy things that you have to deal with are not part of that. I also just want to say that I think it's terrific that you're doing this because it's very consistent with the master plan energy chapter goals. 2 of those goals are right here. There we go. The fourth goal is, fourth out of 7 is to achieve a townwide goal of 50% renewable sources of electricity by 2029 and work toward a goal of 100% renewable sources for all energy. So this is saying that we have a goal to encourage renewables in the town. And the second one is really aligned: promote land use development and redevelopment policies that encourage energy efficiency and conservation. Well, actually, that isn't. It's slightly off, but anyways, the next thing is I just wanted to mention that as this evolves, and there are a bunch of different groups in town that have an interest in being involved and giving some input into this. Of course, the Energy Committee is one, the MED, obviously, Barry, the Agricultural Commission, not because this might be farming, but because farming, and there's a lot of new developments around how farming and renewables can be compatible, and there's a ton of information out there now. So you can have solar, let's say, in a field and have crops grown below it, or things like that. And then the Historical Commission would probably have an interest, and the Conservation Committee as well. So just as it evolves, so I think that ultimately what I'm saying here is it's terrific that we're being proactive, thinking about it before some big, terrible project comes. But right now we are limited by some big, terrible project from coming. It can't really happen with the current net metering policy. And yeah, I think it's a terrific thing to work towards. Not my highest priority on the Energy Committee, but I think it's a great thing to do because of all those things that you have to deal with, Tavis.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Tavis, do we have enough money to hire somebody to work on this ordinance?
I can't answer that yet. Let me see if I can pull together some estimates and then get that answer back to the board.
Yeah. Okay.
The top of this says that it's a model solar zoning ordinance, and it's April 2018. Is there a more updated one available?
Despite my best efforts, 2018 is the last model, or the latest model.
Okay.
What I actually did is reach out to the current potential project applicant to look not the management group that's doing the actual application for site plan, et cetera, but the company behind them that is looking at putting in solar wherever they can put solar. And I said, do you have an updated model to this 2018 model? And they suggested there have been updated models. This is functionally equivalent to the last federal model, so if you think of how long that process is. And then there's the practical side of it where towns have been modifying it, et cetera. So I'm trying to go to the solar folks themselves and I say, where did you run into the biggest heartburn, if you will? What was the most difficult? What was it about those ordinances that became that? I don't want the easy one because I don't think it does Wolfeboro any justice to say, which one did you just walk in and get whatever you asked for? Because that doesn't get us anywhere either. But if we have an idea of what solar sees as something that, look, they really sat down, they listened to what we were looking for. We had to sit down and look at what they were looking for. Where are those ordinances? That will help me balance, if it turns into an RFQ or an RFP for somebody to write an ordinance, those are things to be looking for.
Okay, so does anybody mind if Tavis just looks and sees, first of all, if we've got money, and second of all, if there's someone out there that does this type of thing? I'm sure there is.
I'm sure there is.
Yeah.
There is.
Right. Okay. Impact fees. I did get, we got a letter off to the school board, or school administration, haven't heard anything yet.
I have not heard back yet.
Yeah, right. So I think you gave me their email, so I think I'll just give them a little nudge.
Yeah, basically what the memo, I mean, you all have the memo in front of you. The memo is basically saying the planning board requests an accounting from Governor Wentworth School District that these funds have been used to pay off the bond for Governor Wentworth Regional School Improvement since 2011. Could you please provide the Wolfeboro Planning Board with this information for each year since 2011 so we can proceed with our revision and update to the impact fee regulations? Didn't put a time frame on it because I really don't know, or Kathy and I didn't really know how big an ask this was of them. But we're now at a week, so I would think sometime
Yeah, well,
middle to early next week might be time for a tickle.
right, that was my thought. I was going to just write and ask them about how long did they think it was going to take to gather this information. So,
I suspect your memo to them was a bit of a surprise. And I suspect it's going to take them some time to gather this information together,
Right.
because I'm pretty sure they never tracked it. Pretty
Yeah.
much the way we did.
yeah. Okay, yeah, go, did you have something, Peter?
Another topic.
What?
Another topic.
Yes, sure.
Last year, there was a group who got together who looked at what the master plan recommended and how those recommendations were moving forward. And Kathy and I have had a brief discussion about getting that process started again. And basically what happened last year was that a small committee got together and looked at what they believed had been done. And when when that information was put together, then that information was sent to the various departments. And it was sent to the departments that were included in any particular line item on the master plan. In other words, there was something which had the select board, the town manager, and the conservation commission, and this thing was sent to them to all three areas, with the idea that it may have been that the conservation commission had basically dealt with this, but the other two didn't really know it had all happened. And so therefore, we could end up checking that off as something done, even though not all three people or three groups had been involved. And so therefore, we got that information back and then put that information together to find out what had been done and what had not been done and how progress was being made.
Well, and also I think it's a good incentive for other groups to be reminded yearly that they've got these things they're supposed to be looking at. So, I mean, I think there is a value to it.
And I also think that one of the things that I will try to emphasize in sending anything to departments is what they have accomplished already, so that this is really not
Right,
punishment. It is saying,
Yeah.
okay, you've done great things to start with, let's keep doing it.
yeah. Okay,
If that's all right with the committee, I don't,
yeah.
Peter,
What do you mean, is that all right?
if anybody doesn't think that's a good idea, then we should maybe not do
Of
it.
this group?
well, Peter, how long has it been since you did it before? Has it been a whole year?
Yeah, it's been about a year.
Yeah.
It
Annual.
was done last year about this
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, you can just say it's an annual checkup.
Okay, so you're all set if we go ahead?
Yeah, historically, the board did that annually.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm saying connect,
Oh,
connect,
connect.
connect.
Okay, did you have something you wanted to add?
No?
Oh, okay. All right, any public input? No? Okay. The minutes from January 3rd.
I move to accept the minutes.
Okay.
Second.
That.
Okay, and Tavis, we had Debbie Orloff submitted something about short-term rentals under other business. Can we just include that? It was given to all of us at the meeting, and she just wanted to voice her support for continuing short-term rentals.
You want that added?
I think so that, people will know that,
Do you want it as an addendum to the minutes or a reference to the comments being submitted inserted in the minutes?
Put it into public input.
Yeah, right.
Debbie Orloff submitted a letter. and-
Oh, that's right, because it says no comments. There was a written all right.
Yeah, right, yeah, yes.
I got one.
Okay, okay, well, just a second.
Go ahead.
Do you have something on the minutes?
Yes.
Oh, okay, all right, then go ahead.
John Thurston questioned whether or not the impact fee was reduced when the Middleton School was added to the Governor Wentworth Regional School District.
Where am I?
Okay, where do we,
It wasn't in there.
Oh, maybe not.
Wasn't in there, but I
Comment that
said
wasn't
that.
included.
It was a question that I asked him.
was it reduced?
Was the impact fee reduced when the Milton School joined the Governor Wentworth Regional School District?
Okay,
We'll put that under where John Thurston asked what impact fees started.
Was
Right.
fee reduced after?
The Middleton School
joined
District was
Middleton School District.
added to the Governor Wentworth School District.
I mean, the answer is no, but
What's that?
yes, I get the comment.
oh, okay, so motion has been made.
Been
seconded.
amended.
Yeah, right. Needs to be
I
amended.
move that the minutes be approved as amended.
Seconded.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded, and including the additional items. in the
As amended.
minutes. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, all right.
Adjourn?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much, folks.